Hi everyone, welcome to 21st Century Saints, our podcast and live stream series for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, those affiliated with them, those who are feeling a little bit poorly, those who are running late, those who are on their holiday, and those who have just finished work. I think that pretty much covers the whole gang here, right? So it's great to have you with us again tonight. We are going to be talking about Sunday night's women's conference. We've got some things we would like to say about that, which happened online for women and those age. Is it 8 and up or 12 and up? I can't remember now, but I want to say 12 and up. It happened here in the UK. Yeah, on Sunday night. I am your host, Jane Christie. We also have with us our co-host, Ruth Heath. Do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Ruth has just finished work. We also have Sara, who is on holiday and is drifting in and out because her mobile is doing its absolute best to bring her to us. Sara, if you can hear us, do you want to say hi? That's okay, because she will be with us just... There she is. We will figure out the technology as we go. We also have our guest here tonight. Now, we've had a lot of discussions about this in the background when we're talking about women's conferences and sacred women's spaces. It's traditional in Mormonism to have a man preside. A priesthood holder has to provide.
Absolutely.
So we can get a little bit defensive about that because we don't obviously have to have a man preside, and it may come across like that, but we see huge value in a man sharing his thoughts instead of to preside or tell us what we should think as women about what we've just heard, or to sort of give the closing words. We want to know what would happen if you showed up to listen and be taught. What things are you going to learn? So we wanted to bring that perspective in too. So thank you so much to our guest, Peter Bleakley, who's with us to do just that. Do you want to say hey?
Hi. I thought I was presiding. Anyway, I'll try and shift gear.
Unlucky.
Apologies for my late arrival. I've been taking rebellion to the streets of London today. I've been out marching with the teachers' strike with 40,000 people up to Trafalgar Square. So I've been a bit distracted.
These are the things I want to talk about first.
I'm in the zone.
Tell the world, why are you striking?
So the National Education Union, which is the biggest teacher union, is striking for better pay and for the government to fund pay rises, because they've given us small pay rises that below inflation, but they've taken them out of the local school budget rather than giving more central funding for it. And the profession's in big trouble. Within the first 4 or 5 years of teaching, a quarter of all teachers leave the profession, which is a disaster. And I've got a lot of LDS friends, actually, amazing young mothers, young women who trained as primary teachers, and they would be like actual Mary Poppins. You know, they're the people you'd love to have teach your children. And it just wasn't feasible. Too much stress, too much work, and not being paid enough to make it worthwhile. And they've dropped out. It's just awful. It's carnage out there. So a lot of children have real instability now, with teachers leaving during the year and dropping out, and having cover teachers come in for short periods, and it's not good for the children, particularly in primary sector. So that's what we're all campaigning about. We're being totally ignored by the government so far, but we're determined. We'll see how it goes. And we had junior doctors out today as well, lots of other people. It's been because it's budget day here in Britain, so it's a lot of unions were on strike today at once, and we all converged on Trafalgar Square. It was very dramatic.
I bet the atmosphere was fantastic, though.
It was cool. Yeah.
So we're with you. I think in Scotland, which is seeing similar strikes, and it was reached.
Yeah.
So we're with you guys. We wish you every success, and we support what you're trying to do. Ruth, how are things going with you?
Oh, good. Budget day. Talk of the town in our office anyway, because of what I do for a job. But I'm also married to a teacher, so the current situation for teachers, and I think it's a double whammy. I'm sure Peter feels this as well, that they took it on the chin for years and years and years as far as a real rate, real actual pay cut. Because everyone was struggling. As a country, we were struggling. So, okay, they'll take it. So in real terms, their pay has gone down year on year on year on year for many years now. But then through COVID, the amount of extra that they did. So Richard Works in special needs, they stayed open, not just for term time, they stayed open all the way through the half terms, the Easter holidays, into the summer holidays, to provide that structure for the children that they were helping. Oh, I've got an echo.
Sorry, no, that was me. Sorry, I'm trying to share the show on my Facebook while we speak. Carry on.
And they went above and beyond, as most people in schools always do. They went above and beyond and above and beyond. And now to be cast by the government and the government-friendly press as they're somehow being, coming to the table asking for something when they've got it good, is just really rubbish. Now, fortunately, I think there are enough sensible people in the country who say, no, I know a teacher, I know people who work in schools, I know that's not the situation. And as Peter said, all they're doing is taking it from one pot of money and saying, well, you've got to pay it to the teachers. Well, that takes money out of school budget, which pays for all of the resources, which is already underfunded. The repairs that need to be done, all of those things, suddenly they've got to find it in another way and make the teachers the bad guys if the leaky ceiling doesn't get fixed. It's just absolute rubbish. The amount of teachers and support staff that buy their own supplies for the classroom,
yes,
and that's gone on for years. So there we go. I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, we're with you. We're with you, teachers, doctors. All of these services that we really depend on, that are not being valued in the way that they should. Yeah. So yeah, good luck, all of you. Queen Sara, how are you getting on this week? What are you up to?
I'm on holiday this week, folks, in meant to be sunny Cornwall, but it's been nothing but rain all day today. So I'm sitting here in Cornwall with a very dodgy Wi-Fi, well, no Wi-Fi signal, and only a mobile phone for cellular data. So if we struggle tonight, I'm sorry in advance, but it's good to be here. Yeah, well aware of the crisis that's facing so many public sector workers in this country. And for those of us that have worked in the public sector, we've been funding the public sector out of our own pocket for years and years and years. And it is time we got serious about caring for people in this community.
Absolutely. So thank you for sacrificing your holiday time to be with us. Sara has been working still so hard despite being on holiday, on all of the safeguarding issues in the background. So we're really excited to hopefully bring you guys a broadcast on Sunday, because we've got some more safeguarding news. But let's, and also I am in bed because I'm a little bit poorly. I had considered sitting this one out, but you know what? We'll see where the conversation goes. I'm nice and chilled and cozy. I'm wearing my jammies. So yeah, let's just see how tonight goes. We should have some fun with it, I hope. Okay, Sunday night's broadcast. Let's begin with so who was all there? Who was attending? Who was speaking? I mean, we had Hans.
Mm-hmm.
No, I've always said Hans Boom, but it's Hans Baum. Is that correct? Am I pronouncing his name? I believe it's Hans Baum. We're pronouncing his name as. So I'm really glad that I know now how to say that properly. We also we had Tracy DeMarco, and this is the first time I've seen Tracy DeMarco speaking. So my understanding is that Tracy DeMarco is one of the newly called Women's Council over Europe, which is a kind of new calling. I I believe it's Tracy DeMarco, a Sister Griffiths, and I can't remember who the other one is. And I've been really excited to see what happens with this calling, what's going to be done. And it's obviously, I don't know. I don't know what goes on, but this was the first time we got to see her. She seemed brilliant. We also, the materials had really promoted that the women who were going to be speaking were Tracy Y. Browning and Sister Rebecca Craven. So yeah, what did we expect going in? What were our hopes? What did we expect them to speak about?
It would have been really nice if we'd heard some relevant talks to the UK. So it'd be nice for them to talk about the falling membership and what, as women, we can do to maybe work in wards and branches where you are really strapped for people to call into callings, and how to make that work and how to keep things relevant for youth. I'd like to hear something about mental health, because I know there's tons of youth struggling with mental health, and there was nothing that touched on that. It's just very ephemeral burdens, just all the sort of buzzwords, but nothing that really dug into the gritty stuff. And it'd been good to talk about cost of living crisis and COVID and the realities of the stuff that people have actually lived through. But yeah, so it'd been nice to have something along those lines.
Yeah, I had similar hopes that they would. Sorry, Sara, please go. What were you thinking they might be speaking about? What were you hoping for?
It's really wonderful one of these days to have these leaders come, not to talk to us, but to listen. To come and talk. But don't come to talk. Don't come to tell us things that we've heard 500 million times before. Come and listen to what the concerns of the women in this country are, because they are not the same concerns as women in Provo and Utah and other places may have. One of the specific concerns, as Ruth mentioned, that's happening in the UK at the moment, concerns around our children aren't safe at church, our LGBT communities aren't safe at church. We've got a cost of living crisis and the church still wants tithing. We're struggling with basics in this society at the moment, and still women are giving more and more and more to the church in time, energy, and financially. And I would really like somebody from the senior leadership of this church to come to listen, not to talk to us, just once. Come and say, I'm here. Tell me what's going on in your lives in the UK as women.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah. Peter, expectations?
Well, usually low for any kind of visitation from the States. In reality, I thought the first couple of speakers rocked it, were really amazing, and then it just went downhill to absolute dreck by the end, which kind of depends on the speaker, of course.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Sorry, what was the not Sister Craven, the other Tracy? So Tracy DeMarco, was she the Scottish lady?
Yes.
What nationality was she?
Yes.
Scottish. Amazing. She was fantastic. And who was the second one? Sorry, I'm so sorry. I've come a bit on the hoof.
Yeah, Sister Browning.
Browning, that's it. Yeah. So she actually, sort of in response to what Sara said, she said, I've been talking to you, I have been listening to you, and your country's a mess. Like, she just sort of made a brief statement along the lines of, I know it's all terrible right now in this country. It's just dreadful. But then she didn't say anything specifically relevant at all to what dreadful things are apparently going on in Britain.
She just told us about a lovely holiday in Mexico, didn't she?
Yeah. and buying a nice picture and a cute face promoting story with the coincidence being a miracle, which is something we're often talking about, is all they've usually got to offer as the miracles these days. It's the little coincidences, isn't that lovely God intervening? But again, those are generic ideas. It's not specific to our country. And in the, we've sort of labelled this, the British Rescue Continues, like when Quentin Cook in the adult session of their visitation a year ago kept going on and on about history and boasting about his Kimball ancestors. And he kept saying, I'm going to come to the future. I'm going to talk about your country and its needs. And then he just ran out of time and sat down. He never got there. So again, we keep over and over again. So I totally agree with you. I mean, the main disappointment is they never actually address the real issues going on. They just chuck out vague, touchy-feely, feel-good stuff, which we can get already. We've already heard it in general conference. You know, why do we need to gather for more of that? What you bringing to our place and our people?
Yeah. And save the airfare. You could just
stay lady was best.
In the States, couldn't they? If it's generic,
yeah.
Yeah,
actually, I mean, because that's exactly what I'm feeling. If you're doing a cut and paste talk that you take with you in your travels, I mean, it's nice and all that, but you know, there's no point in traveling. You could just deliver that. Send it to me in an email. It would be faster. And
it's be an email.
I would like to start, if it's okay, with a little bit of context and with Sister DeMarco, Sister DeMarco's talk. So I'm not used to hearing a Scottish accent, and she seemed smart and assertive and wise, and she does know the context, and so I was quite excited to hear what she was going to say. I was also very aware of who was on the stand and who wasn't on the stand. So over to one side, we had the presiding authorities. We had now I keep wanting to call him Chris, but it's Mark Stewart. We had Elder Mark Stewart there, and he seemed to be really listening. You know what I said at the start about people who show up to preside and they're there. You know, you can see that they are processing it in a slightly different way to most of the audience. The audience is generally, I think, are going because their expectation and hope is that they're going to be filled, that you're going to tell me, why am I here? Why are we doing this? You're going to give me something that is going to strengthen me and feed me, not just something that I could open Chicken Soup for the Soul or read off an inspirational quote website. You're looking to be given something that is actually going to strengthen you. And you know, very often you see men presiding who don't appear to be engaging with it in that way. Now, I might be totally wrong, and I know I'm reading expression rather than action. I really loved that that Mark Stewart was sitting and fully engaged and smiling and supportive, and could we have more of that, please? But maybe could you send me part of the audience, and could you watch and take notes and ask questions? That's the kind of thing I would like to see. And it's relevant because something happens later on that I want to bring up. So Sister DeMarco gives a talk, and I feel like it's going to sound very generic when I'm sort of relaying some of the things, but she talks about women feeling overwhelmed, overburdened, all of the demands that are placed on us. She's saying, I know the Savior thinks you're great. She talks about women's witnesses. What I appreciated is that often we hear those things being said, but it just feels like words. I appreciated the intent behind it, because she's clearly seeing women who are having a lot of demands placed on them. Now, I would suggest that some of those demands are placed on you by the church. you know, I got the sense that she's talking about sort of the world's demands, a woman's role, and women having lots of conflicting messages. But some of those demands are because you're asking women to carry the church in a lot of ways. Her point really, I think, was seeking comfort or peace in the Saviour. And I found it to be quite empowering and it was nice. It was a nice talk. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think she talked about women being undervalued. And as you just said, you've absolutely hit on it, which is this is applicable for how the church makes women feel. I think she did probably mean it from the world's perspective, but maybe she was also being a little bit realistic and saying this is from the church. So undervalued, unloved, worried about the trials of others, overworked, fearful, and concerned about, do we make a difference? And when you think about that in the context of women's at church, they are the genuine concerns and fears. And so many of those things could be addressed very, very simply. There is a very quick and easy way of remedying so many of that, and it's about addressing the patriarchal system that the church operates in. Now, you would say that's the building blocks of the church, and maybe they'll never want to do away with that. But I'll be the Cassandra and call it for as it is. That is how you will keep women in the church. Value them, actually consider how to make use of them, their strengths, really play into their strengths, because they can make a difference if you'll allow them to. Listen to their concerns. They're right, they're on the money, they know the stuff, and when they're worried about the trials of others, they're the canary in the coal mine. They will tell you what is going on at grassroots level. Listen to them, or don't at your peril. Men of the church, not you, Peter, men of the church, that's the reality of it. So when she's saying these are all the things, and maybe she is referring to the world, I think if only the church would recognize that they are in a perfect place to make such a difference to so many women at churches' experience of being active, faithful Latter-day Saints.
Yeah. Sara, what were you thinking about Sister DeMarco's thoughts?
I think, yes, she addressed very, very well a lot of the feelings that women have and a lot of feelings that women are struggling with. And as Ruth said, a lot of those come from some of the expectations that we are supposed to live up to at church, and the frustrations and the difficulties and the challenges that brings. But I also think we need to remember that not all women are feeling like that. Some women are feeling that and are struggling, but not all women feel that. Some women are actually feeling that they're kind of doing okay. And actually they're feeling that they've got their boundaries and assertiveness in place, and they're able to kind of get on and be useful and make a difference, and are not necessarily always feeling overwhelmed and burdened. I do think it was really important. We've heard it 500 times before, but it's so important to hear over and over again that the role of the Saviour is to love people. When she pointed out that he said to Peter 3 times, if you love me, feed my sheep. And I think that's the most important thing that came out of her talk. If you love Christ, if you really want to be a Christian and you really want to be doing things, the ministry, the work of Christ, then love people. And actually that kind of summed up everything that she needed to give the message to us. We know you're overburdened. We know you're exhausted. We know this is difficult. Loving one another is what's needed, because that will get you through those really, really difficult times.
Yeah, and I would have loved to have heard that being expanded on, because I feel like because I love that's what you're hearing, because often what I did have these sort of feelings that okay, if you're feeling overwhelmed, overburdened, one of the answers is, remember Jesus said, go feed sheep. I don't want to feed sheep. Can I be fed, please? Can I have a rest? Can I just go lie down over here and take a nap? But yes, and that's why I think expand on it some more. Give us some nuts and bolts. What does that look like? If I'm feeling overwhelmed, I would love to hear you mentioned the word boundaries. Could you talk about boundaries? How can women set boundaries in church and say that this is too much? Because we don't see it modeled. And I think another, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to come to you, Peter, because I have a thought I'm going to sit on for a moment. What were you thinking?
I thought she was stunning. As you said, she sounded like she knew her brief. She understood. She was professional. She was articulate. She was the kind of woman we meet all the time in normal life, you know, in our places of work, in roles of responsibility. And you very rarely hear from higher up any kind of echelon in the church, where they're meant to keep pretending their whole world is family and wifehood mostly, and they're not really meant to say anything meaty or doctrinal because that's the men's job. So she was clearly one of the amazing, remarkable women in the church who don't play those games. And you got men like that as well, and you just sort of lament because you always think, oh, if she was in Young Women's General Presidency or Relief Society Presidency, it'd be amazing. But by the time people get there, they get so intimidated, they get so institutionalized and scared. They kind of lose whatever independent thought or energy they used to have. It seems the higher they go up the hierarchy, or they would not be trusted because you're not meant to be thinking for yourself in this whole system. So she just shows the potential this church has to empower women, to give them leadership roles, which they do get, even though they're limited compared to men, through the church program, as it were. And the benefits we all get if we serve missions or give talks regularly or teach lessons, you know, that educates you, it gives you skills, it makes you a better communicator. And she actually, you know, absolutely embodied all that. And if this system works, that'd be great. You know, the reason they've created this role, and I think they're piloting it in Europe, is this idea of having men counselling with women in leadership decision making. And their role is meant to kind of be like the Relief Society parallel to the area presidency, and to bring that women's voice into Europe area level stuff, because there hasn't been a female role doing that before. So if she's the kind of caliber of person they're bringing in, fantastic. But will they listen? Will they actually be given the opportunity? Well, we all know from our experiences locally, of course, they won't. But it's good to hear someone trying, at least, I guess.
Yeah. Could you pause a second, Peter? Sara, you sound like you are completely.
Yeah.
You have a thought you want to share?
Oh,
she's frozen.
Okay, sometimes it takes a little second for Sara's sound to catch up. So although the stream may be frozen, Sara, if you want to try again, did you have something that you wanted to share? Right, so we're going to wait and to see if Sara can rejoin us.
Can I just respond to something Sara said earlier? So
would you please?
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I just thought I loved what she said about how actually it's not all women are stressed out and strung out.
Yes.
And I absolutely agree in the church that a lot of of course they are, especially if you've got children you're dealing with and too many callings when they should leave you alone when you've got young children and not giving you more leadership things to do, which a lot of women have said really broke them. So absolutely, and since I got excommunicated, I'm not in the meetings anymore. I'm not obliged to do home teaching. I don't have to do all the busy work, and you can step back a bit. You realise what a total waste of time most of that is. The meetings go on and on, talking about doing things, but never actually doing them because it's fantasy. The things we're talking about doing won't work anyway, and they didn't work the last 10 times. So why are you going back to that again? And also, you don't have the manpower anymore. The people are leaving. There's no one got time to do this. I remember at Welling Ward Council, everyone there, men and women, would kind of drag themselves there from a long day of work, and it was exhausting. And we had the missionaries were a machine there. Every week we had new converts who, because of the mission system, we'd never met, and we spent half our meetings just trying to remember what people's names were and write them down. Never mind actually minister to them. We had no relationship with them because the mission system was baptizing them after they'd only come to church once. And so it was just exhausting. And to get away from that and step back, you realize how futile and exhausting it all was. but also how it's futile, because if you don't address the real issues causing your members to leave, all these, you know, when I first moved to my new wards, it was thriving. We had a large number of amazing YSAs who the whole ward had invested their lifetimes raising through primary and youth. And we had an amazing retired missionary couple, got them on missions, encouraged lots of them to have temple marriages afterwards. There's about 2 of them left now. Nearly all of them have gone, and the divorce rate among the active members is higher than the ones who left. It's been carnage, all wiped out. And you just think that's a lifetime of work by all these people, hundreds of man hours every month invested in these young people. But because of the things they won't talk about, because of the things they won't address, the sexism, the homophobia, the lying about history, that we get tutted out if we try and bring up on a Sunday, so we can start actually fixing the reason all your children left the church. Instead, it's always these distractions. It's all, oh, life is terrible, but just pray and you'll feel better and think about Jesus. But we need to actually deal with the issues. And that's we've already said, when we get these people come from Utah world and talk the usual bland nonsense and think it's going to be any different or useful to us, it just isn't. You're completely ignoring all the elephants in our room.
And then there might be super lovely people, but it would be, it's going to always just fall very flat with an audience that's desperate to be nourished and are finding just empty calories in what they're saying, because they've heard it all before. They are experienced, seasoned Mormons sat in that room or listening with bated breath, waiting for something that's going to feed them and waiting to hear some solutions or some strategies to try and tackle the real issues, and they're not there, unfortunately. But I thought
Tracy was amazing that she brought empathy, but she didn't bring solutions. I think
one thing I did notice, and I'm a big one on people's choice of language. She spoke in I's. I think this, I think that, and it's powerful when people do that, because it just brings a lot of integrity to her statements. And later on, it was very clear that was juxtaposed with how some of the other speakers used the generic we love you, we this, we that, we the other, which for me, it just grates it, because I don't trust it.
I totally agree. And I think exactly like you're saying, Peter, I'm kind of, I'm really inspired by what Sara has expressed about what about the women who want to do more, or who are asking questions, or who are expressing a discomfort. I would like to, in so many ways, and I appreciate the language here I'm using is maybe about performance, but let's face it, performance is part of how the church comes across. It's things are very polished, they are very slick, the filming looks good. Tracy DeMarco in so many ways was the star of that show. I wanted to ask her, talk to us about this committee. What are you seeing? What are you talking about? What is the future like? What are women going to be doing? Will we see more of this? When we've been focusing, when we've been focusing on safeguarding the people who respond to our questions in church, and leadership, and legal terms also, they're all men. We had initially reached out to the women's committee, where we reached out to them. We contacted Sister DeMarco, and certainly from a best practice safeguarding point of view, women should be part of those conversations. When it comes to reporting, the ideal is that a safeguarding lead is a woman or is not a man. I would have loved to have heard her speaking to the concerns about, so many women and men have reported back to us that they've asked questions about just, I don't feel that this subject is being addressed properly. I'm a bit concerned about this. And they get released for having the audacity to ask that question. She's in a unique position. I would love to hear about her experience. What about women who have more to give and who would like to know, can I do this? Can I tell a bishop I would like to serve in this way rather than wait for it to, how can we spoke about this the other day, how can women, or can women, carve out roles for themselves in church? Is there a way to do that? Is there a way we only have to follow in the footsteps of what has been done and not that there's something new that is unexplored? Yeah,
I think it's
like that idea.
It's dangerous, Jane, because you get a sympathetic bishop and absolutely go for it. Do what feels right for you. And then you'll get the next bishop. And this tells you it was never about the woman doing what felt autonomous and right for her. It was always about with the permission of a man. And the next bishop will come along and pull the rug out from under the organisation for whatever it is they're doing that feels the right fit for them and the people that they're working with. And then it goes, and that breaks people's hearts and leaves them feeling very sort of broken and vulnerable and like, did I do something wrong? No, of course you didn't. You were doing something that felt like the right solution, and you're a grown up, for crying out loud. And you should be able to make a judgment call on what feels right for you and in whatever way your capacity you're serving. And I think when it goes to the Sister DeMarco, I think it is promising that they've got this sort of women's organisation running parallel with the area presidency. But I don't believe it. I don't believe it, in as much as I don't see Sister DeMarco being the closing speaker at a men's meeting and bringing it home and saying, right, I'm going to tie all the thoughts together because pat you on the head, men, I'm here now to tell you what's what. I can't see them standing for that. I can't see them going for that, even though, gosh, she could do it. Yeah,
I was just going to say that she would be brilliant at that. Yeah.
And I know Heidi Griffith from long ago, and just a lovely woman and very smart and very just on the ball. So I think she's probably going to be doing a great job in the background. Yeah. But it's always in the blooming background. It's never modelling men. Listen to these women. Not only have they got something important to say, but you need to listen to them. You know, just because you've got the priesthood doesn't mean that they in any way have anything less to say than our co-people who are sat in the area presidency. They are leaders in their own right over you as well, and that will I just can't see that ever flying at church. But gosh, they've got stuff to say.
Peter.
And that will never happen till there's women's ordination. You know, they can create fake patronizing roles and give the guff about equality, but until the person they are talking to is equal to them in the priesthood ordination system, they will never ever actually regard them as equals, especially when the whole system exaggerates the worst side of patriarchy in the men who rise to leadership in the church, or the vast majority of them. It's just not going to happen, and it's really sad. I mean, are there any women? Are the women involved in the National Safeguarding Committee that's working on the policy in the country?
Yes. Are there?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'll shake
it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Secret information. Yeah. So I mean, but then in the church system, this is great, because they always pilot something before spreading it around. They want people to gradually get used to it. It's always too slow. They will never get this in place in time to save the church. It's doomed. If they did it all now, they might just give themselves a chance. The women might hang around for this, but they're not going to. But this is their system, is you pilot something and then the men say how good it was to have the women's voice, as long as they didn't talk too much, according to Ballard, and then it will start to get spread. But the first presidency don't model this, you know. They, or certainly in the recent generation, no women had even a hint that the family proclamation was being created until President Hinckley phoned them up and told them he's taking over the women's session of conference to announce it, because of course he doesn't want to upset all the men who'd have had talks prepared. This is their moment in the sun. The women can shut up and make room for it and change their talks, but not the male priesthood leaders. That would have been too socially awkward. And no women were involved in the November policy. You know, they don't actually practice this, but if they did, as you say, if they actually listened, they'd stop doing so many dumb things.
They would.
It would, you know, they'd actually. And the irony, on Sunday, the elders' quorum lesson was Elder Suarez's talk last conference about how men and women are equal in the church and always have been, and are equal in marriage. And I was like, you kidding me? So I kind of gently worded it as, well, my recollection is that, you know, that we absolutely used to be taught that the man is the master of the home and he makes the final decisions and he presides. And isn't it wonderful that this gradual change has happened? And then the lesson suddenly flipped to, oh, yeah, well, okay, yeah, that's ongoing revelation, isn't it? You know, isn't it great that God's teaching his people? And then I was like, no, it wasn't. It was feminist activists changing society and changing the church. And then it was, oh, yes, well, you know, you can't put new wine into old bottles. So we have to wait for society to change for the good things to happen. And you've gone a complete 180 degrees from the prophets lead to people to the future as through revelation to they have to drag behind the social innovations that other people did all the work for, usually women. And the state of quantum uncertainty that the typical TBM Mormon mind exists in is they're always holding these two completely opposite positions in their minds at the same time, and they'll bounce between the two as if they're not contradictory. And they just can't see it. And it's so maddening. But this is why women end up trapped, because they're not given real power. They're given patronizing platitudes. They're given token roles occasionally.
And we're not, it's not that we're not just given real power.
Yeah.
We're given masses of responsibility, but no power. So this is something for another day, but you know, we are made literally responsible for the thoughts and actions of men. Literally responsible. We're made responsible for risking our own life to bring new life into the world, even when it's not economically sensible. It's not sensible for our health. We might have health concerns, but keep having babies. We're made responsible for so many things at church. So many auxiliaries just could not function without women taking up the helm and running them, and yet we have no ability to be an instrument for change. We've got such soft power. It's pathetic. And yet there's so many very, very experienced, sensible women that have a lot to say and a lot of effort, you know, could have put a lot of effort into making good change for everybody, not just for women, good change for everybody. And I think it's
moment
sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, the moment I sort of realized that they can't change, they're incapable of it, was when they announced the Come Follow Me study at home system, you know, a home-centered church supported by Sunday church. And in the past, the only way to frame being the priesthood patriarch in the home in any way reasonably was to kind of say, right, if you're going to go for the women nurturing, you know, taking care of the social, emotional and feeding of the children, the patriarch role then is a spiritual role. You bring it, you, dad, are responsible for making sure your family has spiritual experiences. You make sure they pray, you organize family home evening, you do the spiritual things, you teach your family. At least that gives them a job. But when they presented this, they immediately put it all on the women. There was no discussion at all about men leading the Come Follow Me. They talked, and the films they showed about it, it was all, this is another thing for women to do. And I was like, hang on, what? How does that work with our narratives of the priesthood holder in the home leading the religious life of the family?
Like
they just want to give all the jobs to the women. They do. They literally gave that job as a yet another burden for the mothers and the wives to feel guilty about and carry. No,
well, let's push along a little bit. So we don't have Sara. The link isn't working. I think that her mobile is just struggling with the job it had to do. So she is going to join us in the comments. So if you are listening, hanging out there is going to be great, because we've got Sara with us, in spirit and in words. So I want to see more from those women, because I am a lot more hopeful. I think sometimes we're beginning to see some precedents being set. I don't know. I have a feeling that maybe we'll see some changes or some progress in that way. But certainly with voices like those women, I want to hear more from you. So that's my formal request. Talk to us more about what's happening, what you think, and what your solutions are. Let's move on to Sister Browning, who was bloody brilliant. I liked this. I'm going to just jump straight to Ruth. What were some of your impressions?
Yeah, I did like it. Again, she was for me. Those two first speakers were for me the highlight of it. I thought it was a little bit tone deaf in just because she's flown in from the States. She's talking to women in the UK, and she's straight away talking about holidaying in Mexico and going ziplining and buying artwork, and it just feels a little bit like she's talking to a certain group of wealthy women that maybe it wouldn't resonate with a lot of people in the church and a lot of women in the church. So, but she seemed like a really lovely lady, and she wanted to bring a real life experience in that, and how she'd read it as spiritual experience. As soon as she started giving the experience of the zip line, I knew where we were going with it, with the whole analogy. And I thought in some ways it was quite a good analogy, the whole, putting down things of value for something that was better, and this heavy harness, but it was all worth it in the end. I thought it's quite a nice little analogy. I think for me, with both the analogies that she used, what jarred with me is she talked about them as far as burdens. So the burden was putting on the harness to go zip lining, and both that and buying artwork, I just felt like, but they're choices. That's not a burden. That's not like caring for a disabled child. That's not like the burden of mental health issues or, poverty, or this is something you're choosing to do with your family for fun. And I know it's an analogy, and I know she just wanted to build on that picture. But I just felt, gosh, maybe there was a better one. And that she talked about getting to the top of the zip line and having this beautiful vista, and she felt the spirit. And I know I'm sitting in a different place now, and I probably would have done 10 years ago, thought, oh yeah, it was the spirit that she was feeling. But you do anything and end up somewhere beautiful, and you're going to feel good and exhilarated and like, wow, go me, I achieved something here today, and I feel really good about this, and I'm excited about life, and I'm glad to be with my family. It doesn't mean it's the spirit. Because if it did, it means that everybody else who's walking on the planet having those good feelings, who also are choosing to zip line in Mexico, you're negating their good feelings, or saying that they're feeling the Holy Ghost about zip lining, and they're not. It's just good feelings are good feelings, and it's elevated emotions, and you're jolly well right to have them. It sounded like a fabulous time, but I take it with a big pinch of salt that it then links to the spirit. But yeah, I thought she did a really good job. I'll let Peter talk about the artwork, because it's probably more his realm. But that one I felt a bit triggered by.
Yeah.
Peter.
Well, it's always lovely to hear about people buying art. Do more of that, everyone. As an art teacher, but I agree with you that it was very much, this is middle class, wealthy people's lives she was describing.
Yes.
Then my second layer of thought on that was, that's kind of cool, because she's black, and actually women who are black have to kind of assert the fact that they can have that kind of life too, because the cliche in American discourse particularly is that if you're a black woman, you're from the ghetto, you're in poverty, you're troubled, and your man has left you already. And so I think maybe in a way that's kind of cool. Like she can be an equal in that sense. She's fighting several conceptual battles on fronts. So maybe that was a positive way to frame that. But yeah, it was very much, wasn't it? Just here I am doing expensive things none of you will be able to afford, because not many people can afford to go and buy art. And then it's the God of Lost Keys thing, the shallow coincidence that she bought a beautiful painting of some children. As she was leaving, the mother of those children came in, saw it was the painting she'd gone there to get, and offered her double the money or something. And she talked through her social awkwardness about that, and of course the reason she was there was to give this painting to that mother instead. But then you think, well, no, because if you hadn't gone there, then the other mother would have just gone in and bought it. So
Yeah.
she didn't need your help to do that. You nearly screwed it up.
Yeah.
Like if the spirit was really working on you, you'd have got distracted that day. Someone would have phoned you up and you wouldn't have gone. But anyway, but you know, that's sort of been the skeptical thing. But
Well,
when again,
maybe
this is
just
all they're offering. They're offering the warm fuzzies that are, as you said, are the part of normal life, and coincidences happen. And my dad asked me, I think he's asked me a couple of questions since I've been exed, I no longer have the priesthood and all that. He sort of gently asked a few questions about my spiritual life, like, am I still praying, or in a sense, I think it's about, are you still getting that sense of God or relationship with God, and so on. And yeah, I can certainly say that if you've been excommunicated and been stripped of your temple endowment and your priesthood, the cute coincidences still happen. And you don't need to be praying every day for them to occur. And you can still appreciate them and feel good and say, thank you, God, or whoever made that happen. And so
I'd like to talk for a little
it's
second.
making a lot out of very little. Yeah.
Yeah. I reckon, talking about the warm fuzzies for a moment, which is what women's conference or women's conferences are often just coming back to. It's about the warm fuzzies, and there's little content. My experience of what I would define as the spirit, I am quite happy to be the only person in the whole world that will call that thing the spirit. So if it's the God of Lost Keys, that's absolutely fine, because I needed the keys, and in that moment, if I'm finding some kind of divine connection, I'm happy to call it that. I love that, Richard talks about it being the same feeling as, driving over a humpback bridge that your little girl would experience. Yeah. And I remember teaching a lesson to young women, not out the manual. I took them outside. We all stood on a very low wall, and I asked them to jump. But in the second before they jump, just to pay attention to what that feeling is. I think that's what eternity feels like. I think can be what the spirit feels like. I can connect to the spirit in the warm, fuzzy ways, but it has to be accompanied with the painful ways and the less comfortable ways. And I'm okay with all of that, as long as there is substance to it, and that is not what my whole faith hangs on, I guess is what I'm saying. So I feel like there's a place for it. If she's seeing God in those moments, awesome. Tell me more, but also give me something to work with. And I actually feel like she did, because as she's talking about having to feel like, I mean, it is a bit silly. It's that they're experiences that most women who are in that audience are never going to have, of especially, the demographic of being older women in the church. We're an aging church, of having to feel safe while someone is going to catch you, or this machinery is going to work, having to trust that you're not going to fall to your death, but also having this connection moment with another woman who's in pain. And she talked about the God moment for her was how she talked about how it was sort of an awkward moment, or an awkward thing that they have to get through. And they got through that by talking. So she talks to this mother, because she doesn't initially realize what the situation is, and that she's talking to the people who are harnessing her in and, you know, helping her to feel secure. And I thought she gave us a little bit to work with there about how those conversations are really important, because that's the warm fuzzy. The coincidence is just almost sort of the red herring. The warm fuzzy, the real moment is in that connection.
Yeah, it's the human
Yes,
connection,
yeah.
isn't it? And it's, as Sara said, it's about loving each other and loving each other through your actions, not just in the warm fuzzy words and saying that, talking the talk. It's really walking the walk. And if you believe in Jesus, it's doing it to try and be like him. And I think that's the nub of her talks. That's the bit that it would have been really good if she had spent more time developing that. I was in this one situation where I talked to somebody and then I trusted them. I was in this other situation where I talked to this person and then I understood them and I was able to show empathy in this way. We didn't need the whole big talk around those things. We didn't need the big analogies around it. We just needed to understand that she had found in both of those moments a human connection with somebody else, and through it had led her to act in a certain way. That's powerful, and that transcends all religions and non-religions, doesn't it? That human connection is so vital and important.
And okay, we can say that that's just this is an ordinary experience. I see divine in those connection experiences, and you know, and you don't have to. That's what it looks like for me. So I think seeing it as opportunity. We could have those conversations with anyone. We could have those God moments with anyone. But she gave us a key there to what I would like to keep from her talk. That's one of those things I wanted to hold on to. But she was talking about how I don't even know what I wanted to do with this. She referred to keeping her covenant. And not I keep my covenants in this sort of generic broad, all of them are ticked. She talked about her covenant, and I don't think I've ever heard it talked about in the singular before, and I liked that. She knew exactly which covenant she was talking about there.
Did you notice as well that the first two speakers, neither of them quoted from the Book of Mormon, and neither of them quoted modern day prophets either? They both focused on the New Testament. They both focused on Jesus. And I thought, is that on purpose, or is that just a coincidence that was the case? But yeah, when she spoke about covenant, one thing she did say was covenant makers get special help. But then she went on to say, and we ought to help each other. So I don't like covenant makers get special help. I think that's exclusive and them and us sort of wording, instead of saying maybe covenant makers should be doing more, or should expect, or you know, should expect to help people more because they know a little more. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought it was really interesting that both her and Tracy DeMarco really lent into New Testament and the Saviour.
Yes. Peter, any other thoughts about that talk, or shall we move on?
I think, yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, sort of, we were talking about how can women step up into making roles for themselves. And what struck me is everything you need to run the church properly is in the seminary scriptures. D&C 58 is all about being anxiously engaged in a good cause, and you've already got permission. And it then follows up with, if you only do stuff kind of grudgingly when other people tell you to, you don't get any blessing for that. In fact, you're damned. And I think that ties in really well with Jesus's teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, if you only love people who love you back, if you only do the easy things, that's its own reward. You're not getting any heavenly blessings for that, because people without religion do that. That's normal transactional relationships. So he taught that the way you start being a Christian is where you go the extra mile, where you turn the other cheek for them to keep hurting you, but you still stay with them, where you pray for the sinner, where you want to be present with them and show them a better way rather than running away or not bothering. And Doctrine and Covenants 58, I think, is fantastic, because it just destroys this whole system we have in the church, that you have to wait to be told by someone higher up what to do, or you can only do the thing that's always been done before. D&C 58, and I got this at 14, and I just find it so heartbreaking that the whole church has kind of forgotten this, because they taught it to us when we were kids. Says you've already got permission. God wants you to identify roles for yourself and just do them. If they're good, they're good, and you don't need to get permission.
The same people that were writing the Doctrine and Covenants were also subjugating women, trafficking women. You know, so telling us that we can build our own roles for ourselves is ignoring that that was also the dynamic of the same people that were writing down the Doctrine and Covenants. So I hold little space for that. I'm happy to go to the New Testament and do the whole, you know, look for the need and be the need. But I find it really tricky and challenging to give space for Doctrine and Covenants when we've not publicly and categorically distanced ourselves as an organisation from those people and their practices at that time. And only by doing that can we hold space for any of those relevant thoughts and powerful thoughts and give them credence, because they were doing both at the same time. So for women, it's a really painful.
New Testament says that women can't speak in church, so they're all as bad as each other, to be fair. That's very clear in Paul's letters.
It's fine. No more calling.
I agree with you. So I agree with you completely in that we have to filter somehow. So this is kind of where my way of approaching things comes from. Why my podcast is called Mormon Civil War. And I frame things as it's either Christian or it's Pharisee. It's either Christ, the good Jesus's plan, or it's Lucifer's plan. And we've been doing both all along, all the time, in the same church, in the same scriptures, from the pre-existence. And again, in Mormonism's favor, it actually, with the pre-existence story of that conflict and what it was about control. Lucifer saying, I will do all your thinking for you, I'll make all your choices for you, you call me God. But you have to give up entire freedom to do it, versus Jesus saying you will have freedom to think for yourself and choose, but there'll be risk. You have to be responsible for the consequences. I think Mormonism framing the entire nature of the universe and the human struggle in that way is actually really helpful, even though the current leadership would never see it that way, because they just want to be obeyed like Lucifer. So I totally agree with you. Therefore, the only way to engage with any religion is to filter, is to pick and choose, is to say these ideas, these stories, these scriptures resonate with what seems to me the core message of the good Jesus. But the other things attributed to him or others saying that doesn't work with that, I'm going to put that in the other camp. I'm going to say that's human frailty, that's selfishness, that's power hungriness, that's control freakery, that's the Pharisee religion, that's Lucifer's religion. And in this religion, we've already been told what they both are, in actually a very clear way that most Christians don't articulate it. Again, a gift to us that we're squandering. I agree with you. We need to set fire to D&C 132. Absolutely. I'm not pretending the Doctrine and Covenants is all sweetness and light, but it has the ideas in it that could save us if we adopted them. Yeah. Sorry.
I think the organisation that you want to save, though, with all respect, works for men. It doesn't work for women. And it never has done, and it never was intended to. And I know that generically we're supposed to read mankind and man is that he might have joy and all of those sorts of things, and see he means both men and women, surely. But actually, no. Read it as it's written, because that is the honest truth of the religion.
Yeah.
And you can expand that to Christianity, and I completely agree that women were told to shut up and put up. And what was lovely was in Tracy DeMarco's talk, where she talks about, actually, if you really analyse who were there for the most important parts of the Saviour's life, it was women. All of the big events were witnessed by and support, and he was supported by women. Now all of that gets forgotten in the Christianity that is filtered through the ages, and we know literally things were taken off the table that reference women in the book that then became the Bible. So, you know, we look at the New Testament and then we think it's a book, and obviously it's a collection of things that were correlated by a group of men back in the day. Unfortunately, fortunately, there are good guys like you around to stand up and challenge, but you pay the price for that, and maybe that's a high price to pay for speaking up and speaking to power. But that's the experience, that's the lived experience of most women at church, that you speak to power and you get metaphorically burnt as a witch, whether it's excommunication or just snubbed and silenced. You're the difficult one, your hard work.
Yeah.
You know, that's the reality.
Well, let's put a pin in some of these ideas that we're going to come back and revisit next Wednesday night. Peter's going to join us to talk a little bit more about the church in exile. This is year 2 of excommunication, so we're going to talk a little bit more about what it's like for Peter. Moving on to Sister Craven's talk. I got less and less excited and took fewer and fewer notes as I went. I found this particularly difficult, and I know that at General Conference, people had sort of similar difficulties. Ruth, do you want to maybe summarise what was being spoken about?
Oh, do you know, she started off, I really, really wanted it to be good, because the first 2 I was thinking, oh, well, you know, this is promising. She started off, and I'm sorry, it's an Americanism, but she had that silly, pretend, childlike, silly voice that just grates, speaking very sweetly and softly, and it just rings really false. It rings pretend. It doesn't ring like a real voice. What I struggled with was that she was talking in streams of consciousness. It was lots of sound bites, but no real thoughts were completed and finished. So it was just say all the buzzwords. It was like listening to children in primary or seminary class. Say your prayers, read your scriptures. What else do I need to say to get the tick boxes that I've said the right answer somewhere in there? It felt like that. Then when she started banging on about covenant path, like that's been around forever. No, it hasn't. It's been around for maybe 10 years as a buzzword and as a phrase. But that bell gets rung, doesn't it? It's dog whistle Mormonism to say things like covenant path, but not actually finish the thought of where you're going with that, which is it's exclusionary. There is a them and us approach to everything. And I just find it depressingly sad. She also then wanted to talk about the prophet and how wonderful he was, and how Elder Cook says how wonderful he is. And I just thought, you're just navel gazing now. Don't tell me how somebody is wonderful. Let me see them in action being wonderful, and I'll say that they're wonderful. But I don't need to take your word for it.
Well, could we rewind back a little bit to the beginning of the talk? And this is where I start. The beginning is where I started to struggle. What I love is when in conference we get to see voices or talks where we get to see marginalized voices being amplified. That is exciting and beautiful to me. And I think the best example that we have ever seen of that was a few years ago, and there was a Special Relief Society conference, sort of very edgy and fun and not conference-like at all, presented more like TED Talks. And they used that opportunity to ask a queer woman to come and speak, and didn't speak for her, but it was a perfect way to amplify the voice of someone who is traditionally marginalized. At the beginning of Sister Craven's talk, she immediately goes to amplifying the voice of a young woman who is in a wheelchair. And we don't get to see that. I don't think I've ever heard a wheelchair user speak in a conference or anything like that. And she's a young woman. This is very, very good. I hated it because what we so easily do, despite the fact that this was the young woman's own words. They weren't changed. It was a recording. We jump so quickly to making disabilities or marginalized voices like disability porn, like emotional porn. And we're supposed to sort of tilt our heads, say, oh, that's so sweet, and look at your testimony. We have a tendency to infantilize the voices of people in the disabled community. And I felt like this was a young woman who was being very clear in what she said and thought, but she seemed like she was 8 years old. It did feel it did feel younger than a typical 12-year-old girl. Is no longer. I remember when I was serving in the as young women's presidency, one of the first things I did as young women's president was to go to the young women's cupboard and chuck all of the books out that were about pinafores and butterflies and just because our young women aren't 8 years old anymore. They are beginning at 12, going through to 18, and they are mature and they are smart. And maybe the days of a 12-year-old being they're not that age anymore. I really, really struggle with talking down to young women because they can handle it. They are ready to be treated like the young adults, the young women that they are. And I say that in an inclusive way. Often we have a lot of transgender in our wardrobe alone. There are transgender young women who are not women. They're part of the audience. So while I love seeing the mic passed, I don't even know if I can verbalize exactly why it was a struggle to me. Because it didn't seem to do anything other than double down on, here is a young woman who feels the spirit. I don't know. Would one of you guys jump in and see if perhaps this? I've just tried really hard not to think about it because I didn't like it. So continue. How about we go to you, Peter?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we want inclusion, and as you say, this is a rare thing. It was great to have someone in a wheelchair speaking and being listened to by everyone as someone with her own voice. So I thought that was very positive. I don't think you should be necessarily surprised that it ends up being a ditzy testimony, because that's what the leader lady was doing with her whole talk. So it's all on the same spectrum, and it's going to be faith promoting, isn't it? I mean, you could say Jesus started all this because he made pity for the disabled a key part of his ministry, and then healed them. And so that's a big part of the narrative, you could say. The idea of how do you cope with completely outrageous injustice, unfairness in your life because you have some kind of mental or physical disability, or a situation in your life you cannot change and you're kind of trapped by. So I think it's valid to speak to that and to speak from that place. It is symbolic of the things we all experience that can be a bit like that in our lives. But definitely, I mean, there's a long history of the church sort of doing disabled porn, and that's just demonetized you. But also, it's vicarious gratification from other people's suffering, and they really do it with the poor. One of the things that's really radicalized me, in speaking up against the leadership, is particularly the financial stuff. That the poor, they keep gloating about the destitute paying tithing, and the poor man. And even when the presiding bishopric were trying to gaslight and do a quick interview to have good PR after the whistleblower revealed that they were sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in Enzyme Peak, one of the councillors in the bishopric had to say that if you have to make a choice between buying your children food or paying tithing, you should pay the tithing. They weren't going to budge on that. They were making clear this doesn't change anything. You must still do this. But they insist on giving themselves a salary as general authorities that is in the top 10% of income for Americans and Brits, two of the richest countries on earth. In fact, probably more like top 3% because they get everything else paid for and it's tax
Yeah, I was
free.
going
And
to
then
say it's the remuneration package that goes around it for them.
so they don't have half the expenses that would use the senior executive salary up.
Yeah.
And so they have already made sure that none of them will ever come even slightly close to the situation where they have to choose between feeding their children or paying tithing. They're expecting the poor to do that for them. And they talk about it like we're all in this together and it could happen to anyone. And when you challenge people about the idea of why are we paying our general authorities high salaries rather than a survival stipend, they always say, well, if they were in business in those roles, they'd get far more money. You know, that TBM's rationalize that and make it seem okay.
Yeah.
But then they'll pile onto the poor. So it's sick. You know, the stories of the African missionary who scrimped and saved to afford his mission, and he's going to appreciate it more because he had to suffer, like in the Ensign, in conference talks, they say things like that. It's fetishizing the poor because their own children are not having to make that scrimpy savey thing. It's the poor people have to find everything more difficult, have to have the massive crisis of faith.
Within a prosperity gospel, if you're poor, you need to improve
within the prosperity gospel.
Yeah. There's something wrong with you if you're not prosperous.
So every time they do a talk about someone having to choose between feeding their children or paying tithing, I just think you utter hypocritical bastard, because you have made sure that their tithing, their actual tithing, is given to your family so that you never have to do that yourself.
Yeah. So going back to this young girl,
about it as if everyone has to pass that spiritual test.
Going back
they make it harder for the poor to be Mormons. Yeah, sorry, go.
That's all right. I was just going to say, oh, hi, Doug Vincent. She was an American young lady. And again, it feels like this talk was a recycling of a talk, and she'd prepared this clip before, because there are lots and lots of really interesting youth in the UK that would have been really happy to participate. And I bet that girl was really excited that this woman was taking her clip and using it and showing it in different firesides and presentations. But ultimately, it's tokenism. It really, really is. And it didn't actually do anything other than make a few people, like you say, just go, oh, isn't she sweet? It really, and it really bothers me, especially when I know that in most of the lifespan of the church, having a disability, whether physical or mental, was seen as a judgment from God. It was seen as you were less valiant in the pre-existence. So it feels quite damaging then to not address that and to just trot someone out for the R's and the U's. It just feels a little bit like we're doing some sort of a, you know, isn't she cute? Isn't she lovely? Instead of, no, this is a real person who has her own thoughts and her own integrity and her own views on things. And we're not going to just trot her out for entertainment value. We're going to allow her to have a seat. The fact that she's in a wheelchair is irrelevant, but of course it is relevant, because she didn't just choose anyone, she chose her.
Yeah, that's the paradox. So I guess where my struggle is, as the mother of a son who has at times been used as emotional disability porn for lots of different reasons, who is infantilized by people who just, they don't realize what they're doing most of the time. This is I think a very unconscious act. That previously we've just had this talk from Sister Browning, and she makes this connection of this artwork that she's bought. The mother of the child who's in this painting, they connect because she talks in this really vulnerable, honest way. You can feel the truth in the experience. And she's talking about how the mother traces the the outline of this daughter's back, because the child in the picture looks healthy. Later on, the child was going to be very, very sick, and Sister Browning totally understood what that physical motion meant, that as she traced that, that's what I used to do when it was my premature daughter, and I valued these pictures where she looked very healthy, and I would do that tracing motion too, and that was the beautiful connection. And I have struggled over the years with the ensign story, or the story of whether it's disabilities, but normally it would be something like cancer, where the person has cancer and they go to church anyway, and they still served, and they still showed up in all of these meaningful ways, and what an inspiration they are because they are still going to church. And you are there to be an example still. Even cancer isn't enough to release you from having to be this person, this expectation that the community have of you to be an inspiration. And so when it comes to, oh my goodness, this is the first time I've seen a conference with a speaker who is a young woman, her words are being amplified, that is exciting and wonderful, and yet I'm finding pain in it because I don't even know how to fully express it, but the young woman was making very clear that she feels positive about the future, and that she doesn't worry about, these kind of things, because she has all this hope in the gospel. And the reality is that if you're going to look at if you're going to amplify the voice of a marginalized community, you have to hear their pain. You also have to hear what we need to do to make to mitigate the fact that they are marginalized and we don't hear their voices, that during COVID they've been through hell and their mobility has been affected through not being able to move around as much, that they've not been able to have the sacrament, that they don't get to pass the sacrament, that all of these things that are part of the pain of living in the right now and not just forget before you even get into the future. That's what I really struggle with as a mother. I want to see if my child is being spoken about or their voice amplified. You have to hear their whole voice and not just the parts of the story that are ticking the Mormon boxes, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I struggle because it is brilliant. It was unfiltered. It was what she said, but it could have so easily been scripted, so yeah. Later on, Sister Craven and Peter, you've already, Ruth, you had already mentioned this. So Sister Craven then goes on to just say the Mormon words, just say all of those magic words that we put together. It feels like one of those, what do you call those, sort of word art pictures where you just put all of the words down and it just comes up with this, this bunch of words and phrases that are motivational and inspirational and don't connect with me in a human way. Because Sister Craven was talking about the we's and the we shoulds, I want to know, Sister Craven, I want to know what you think and what your experience is. We went from vulnerability and honesty and realness, and you amplified a young woman's voice with disabilities. Oh my goodness, God bless you for that. Thank you for doing that. But I need to know what you think and what you're connecting with, and what are you strengthened by when it gets really tough? Because even when you're telling me how wonderful the prophet is, you even start quoting another general authority to tell me how wonderful you think the prophet is. Have you had no experiences with the prophet that you could talk about for yourself? Tell me about you. Let me connect with you. Let's jump to you, Ruth.
Why should it matter how wonderful she thinks the prophet is? It doesn't matter. It's meaningless. It's perfectly meaningless. It really, really doesn't matter, because if you are there to talk about the Spirit, the Savior, it's Jesus's church. It's not the prophet's church. If you're there to talk about those things, then the other bits fall into place anyway. You shouldn't need to be doing the hard sell on Russell Nelson. And you shouldn't need to be doing the hard sell by telling me how great Cook thinks Nelson is. That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous. And if that's the only selling point, somebody out, this other bloke thinks that this bloke's great. What's that got to do with anything? It's just utterly nonsense. And like you say, when she starts speaking in the we's, we've gone down the Mormon avenue of, I'm not going to put my name behind this. I'm going to talk generically, and I'm going to say we, because then it makes a them and us. It's you and it's we. So we're distant now. I'm not going to speak from my heart as an I. I've experienced this. I felt that. I'm going to say we collective are doing these things or thinking these things, and you are now othered. I know it's a really sort of small thing, but it's something that people, particularly at church, have done for a long time, and it just bugs the snot out of me. It really does. When people used to stand up at the front of Sunday school and say, "We welcome you here today," and I'm thinking, there's only you, Brian. Who else is here? Who is this we that's welcoming us out? We're all just sat here looking at you.
Do you know what's so weird is that I'd written down this note that I thought was fantastic that I'd actually forgotten about through all of the words that she was saying about. To be fair, it's the expectation is when women give talks, we are quoting men. We're it's based on whatever a man has said, whatever the talk has said. We're encouraged to do that, and so she is definitely following in that vein. Unfortunately, it sets us up for the expectation that that's how women should speak, that we should be drawing constantly on so that your faith is made up of quotes of what men have said. But she talked about this really fantastic thing where she starts to tell a story that involves the final phrase that I've written down is leaning into the Lord. And I really liked it. And if you just did this talk about that idea and expanded on it, I would be 100% there for that. I also liked that as at some point I had noticed that as the previous speaker, it might have even been, I'm actually not sure, but Elder or President Baum moves over and gives up his seat for her so that he's no longer in that sort of he's no longer immediately sitting on the stand. He's moved out of the way and he's sort of sitting over next to Elder Stewart now, which I thought was very cool because we don't really get to see that. The presiding person sits where we can all see. I like that. But yeah, Peter, any other thoughts on Sister Craven before we move on? On Sister Craven's talk, not Sister Craven herself.
Yeah. Well, it was just spiraling random consciousness things and trite nonsense. So, I mean, this is the thing that has driven my family nuts for generations, it turns out. So my mum used to, we'd have these big national conferences at the Royal Albert Hall in London or whatever. And she was, I think, like a regional PR person. So she's going wanting some message to put into the newspaper article she's meant to produce afterwards and so on. And I remember one where it was just the typical, and she was sort of cynical about it beforehand. It was all the women said was, "You're so lucky to be here at these prophets' and revelator apostles' feet, and we love Britain, and we used to be here." And then they'd sit down, they'd say nothing of substance except to big up the men. And then the men would get up and just big up themselves. They'd be like, "You're so lucky to be sitting at our holy feet and just to have us here." And it's what they did again pretty much in the British Rescue with the 3 apostles last year. They just talked about, "We love you, we've got these connections with your country, we've done no research whatsoever into what your real issues are right now, and we're going to waffle." And they couldn't be asked to actually prepare a talk. That, like if I was in that position where I'm talking to a whole nation and I know they're down to 11% active, I'd prepare a bloody talk. I'd actually want to rescue them. I'd make some kind of effort to speak to their needs and be relevant, especially if you're going to fly to the country and you can't, even on the flight, you can't be bothered to prepare a talk. You're just going to wing it with aphorisms from conference. They're a bit shallow. You know, she's not, as a person, she's clearly not that intellectually whatever. Bless her heart, but that's the kind of person who's been promoted into this role, because she can stroke the egos of the men really well.
She says the
And
right
she's playing that
things.
role, and we see it over and over in the church. She's got the primary voice down. She is a dangerous fundamentalist. Like, if you actually listen to her talks in conference, the last one, she was going on about, I think it was her, about how pleased the Lord is with the 99 who just stick together. We've all got to stick together and be good and be the same and do the right things. And she was just speaking to that Utah culture of us and them, as if, I mean, in a way, it's good. Yes, be the 99. Don't be the problem lost sheep, because they're hard work. Well done. Like, people should get credit for doing the right stuff. But she was kind of overdoing that. Like, this is the club you all want to be in. Whereas, again, Jesus taught the religion is about how you treat the outsiders and the most marginalized. That's where religion kicks in, at the border, not in the 99 fold. It's when you leave it, that's when the religion starts happening.
Yeah.
And she doesn't get that.
Yeah, be the Abinadi.
And
Get
maybe
down to
it's
the stake. You know,
Yeah.
stand up for what you think is right, rather than just go along with the power base. That's a powerful story to like.
Yeah.
And
And maybe it is a case that you have to have suffered in life to be a good religious minister. You know, a lot of these people, of men and women in leadership in the church, have had a very comfortable life, extremely privileged. The tithe payers massively subsidized their university education, which catapulted them into middle class prosperity. They get automatic kudos in their communities. They're all related to the right people and married to the right people, and the whole system they're in elevates them. So, you know, losing your car keys does become your biggest life crisis you've ever faced. So perhaps, you know, what we're seeing here is Tracy DeMarco, as a Scottish woman, is living more in the real world of how hard it is to be a Mormon, where we're a tiny minority, and she appreciates how fragile it is. Tracy Browning's had a premature child and is Black in Utah. I mean, that comes with all kinds of experiences. But Rebecca is not of that world, therefore she hasn't got much to say, unfortunately. And it hasn't occurred to her, as you've said, to listen to other people to find out what they've got to say.
I thought it was interesting.
It's just sad.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting.
Sorry, just finish. Just to say, it's not enough to be the demographic. It's not enough to be a woman in leadership and to have your voice amplified because you're a woman. You also need something to say. You know, it's got to be both. Just like we're saying, the religion has to be the mind and the heart. It has to make rational sense, and it has to bring the love and the compassion and the empathy and the spiritual depth. It's not enough to have token anyone, as we've heard and been discussing. They also need to actually be able to speak for the people in their community who suffered. I've been spending quite a bit of time in my podcast having a right or go at Ahmed Corbett, who amazingly is a Black person in the general presidency, in the Young Men's General Presidency, you know, another pioneer. But what he says is dreck. He's an idiot. He's actually he perpetuates racism in what he teaches. He's written an essay of his personal response to race in the priesthood that they've put into the Institute manuals and all over the church website. And it's basically saying, in a nutshell, the reason that God let us be racistly segregate for 126 years is so that when we get over our racism, everyone will be surprised that the Mormons aren't racist anymore, and we can teach them how to overcome their racism. Ta-da! It was all worth it. Slavery. And but because he's Black, no one's questioned him that's utter garbage. You know,
as is always the case, the best people to stand up to. Yeah, the best people for an organisation to gaslight its members is people from a marginalised group. supporting the power base. So you'll have a black man being used to prop up the racism of the church. You'll have women being used to prop up the patriarchy and support those voices and echo and parrot those voices over and again. And I thought it was very ironic that she used the example of her grandson standing up, wanting to give his testimony and making up a nonsense story, just trotting out this load of diatribe. She used that as her, what's he like, isn't he silly? After just giving a talk that was trotting out all the Mormon jargon and didn't have any joined up thinking in it. And she said, we don't need to, we don't need to do that. We need to speak from the heart. Go right ahead, lady. We're waiting. Go for it. We'll sit here and listen a bit more while you collect your thoughts and actually speak from your heart, rather than trotting out the normal patriarchal bullshit.
So she had held up, she had on the screen was a picture of the written testimony of this little boy who's just learning about spelling, and so she translates it as she goes, and it's the story that his testimony consists of. He's in China. He went to, and he is going to his work, and except there's a zoo and there is problem at the zoo, and reinforces the work that he's doing gets mentioned a few times, and then whatever is happening, and in the end it's all okay in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And I'm not exaggerating, and it was, it was delightful, it was beautiful, but also completely bloody horrific, because the point of it is, well, he's learned that from us. He's learned that there is a formula to a testimony. There is the terrible, my life, problem happens, Jesus is the solution, and here are the words to say to finish it off. And I get that what she's trying to sort of say is your testimony can be really simple. It can be really easy. It doesn't have to be a big story, and that's okay. Because I also have a problem with people who are listening to testimonies and slating them. Your testimony doesn't fit a testimony, or it's the wrong kind of testimony, or so many people get... we really turn into quite a nasty audience quite a lot whenever testimonies are being born. And it's supposed to be crazy and off the wall and a little bit, because that's what our faith looks like. It doesn't always make sense. So we're going to have testimonies that don't make sense. But it was this very, very disturbing thing about how this kid is being groomed and what to say. That's what our kids are. We are groomed in what to say. When someone turns up to church for the first time and they don't look like the rest of us because they're not wearing a suit, or they're not wearing, the summer knee length or longer dress, or whatever it looks like, we very quickly learn what we're supposed to look like at church. And this is one of the difficulties that I have, and our friend of the podcast, Debbie, had sent a message as we were talking here, because the reality is that Sister Craven has learned that to be heard, you have to speak in primary voice. This is what our voice sounds like. This is what the voice of a mother speaking to their child will sound like, or a woman speaking to her husband will sound like. A woman speaking to a church audience, to have any credibility, has to sound non-threatening, and that just becomes what the pitch and tone and cadence of your voice evolves into. And we hate it, and it's irritating and it's patronizing, but it is a woman's actual voice. And so there's a delicate sort of balance there, because I don't believe they're intending to patronize us, but the effect of it becomes that we've been patronized. I also I don't think for 1 second that she's stupid. I don't think that she has nothing to say, because what we often find is that to be credible, often women's work, like Sister Griffiths, this is the first time we've heard you speak. There must be a whole lot that you are saying or influencing behind the scenes, or in committees, or even before you get to a committee, that you know, those conversations that she's having, those relationships that she's building, that's where the gold is. Because if Sister Craven is indeed stupid or doesn't have any thoughts of you know, her own, that would make her really dangerous, because then she could say anything, and church would not have her in that, you know, church leaders would not put her in front of a crowd and risk going off, you know, on some crazy fundamentalist tangent. So I believe there's probably a lot more to Sister Craven than we get to hear. And the safest way to give a talk in church is to rely on platitudes. So I guess that's why my hope is that Sister Craven, we will get to see more of that honesty, that realness. What is it you're actually experiencing? Tell us what life is like for you. Shall we move on to the final speaker, who of course is the closing act? Is it Elder Baum or President Baum? How are we referring to him? Whatever. Hans T. Baum. And
Europe area president, so he could be a president. Yeah.
Right. President Baum.
Both.
So he
Bum.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. It looks like boom, but
We'll
it
just call
is
him Bum.
Baum.
Hands, knees, and thumbs. Okay.
Well,
do you remember anything he said? I remember nothing
I
whatsoever at
do.
all that he
No,
said.
I do.
He said,
Yep, we do.
Remind me.
Because the first thing that he did was to address the husbands who were sitting in the front row. And he, what now? Let me just say from my, he let us know that he had been watching the faces of the husbands throughout the talks. And he thanked them for what their wives had said. And after that, I think I just pretty much gave up on all thoughts of being able to.
We love you, sisters. You are our grandmothers. You are our mothers. You are our sisters. Cheers.
Yeah, that's what he.
Childbirth. He's describing how in Holland they
all
do
of those
home
things
birth.
that we are in adjunct to men.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's come back to the.
Let's come back to the.
Stop it! No. He was feeling your pain, ladies. For goodness sake.
We're going to come back to that story, Peter.
As a 10-year-old, he watched his mother's waters break.
Oh,
What's
let's
wrong
not
with
go
you?
there yet.
Right.
Let's get to that in a minute. But wouldn't it be powerful if he said,
Ruth.
you are our leaders, you are our role models, you are our stateswomen, you are our bosses? Wouldn't it have been lovely if he was able to give those sorts of examples? You are the leaders of business, you are all of these, you are our professors of science. Wouldn't it have been nice to take, you're our grandmothers, you're our mothers, you're our sisters, under the thumb of how you are in relationship to him? I don't care who you are. It's just rude to turn up to a room full of women and say, these men think you're pretty, to the women that have spoken, and we collectively love you as grandmothers and mothers and sisters. Just do one.
Well, it was circling back to the issue that I had very early on. So we've got this
I'm your mother.
Remember having.
You better watch out, Elliot.
I remember having this this moment where I'm thinking, oh, look at how engaged Elder Stewart is with. I believe he's listening to and learning from these women. And as the women were speaking, behind the speaker, the women that we could see on the screen were engaged. They were listening. It was really, really good. I loved to see it. And then Elder Baum gets up and he makes it very clear. During that, I was looking at the men's faces. I was thinking about, so now we have to congratulate the husbands for what a great job their wives have done. Proving almost my point, and I'm resistant to it because I don't believe that he wasn't listening. no, I do. I don't want to believe this, but you're proving my point here. Like you actually, why were you even looking at what they were saying? Because these amazing talks were being given. We are all here to listen to the women, and your focus is on their husbands. You didn't even congratulate their role in supporting their wives' work. Thank you, husbands, for making sure that they are supported in their lives. Thank you for stepping up and being a good human being. No, congratulations and thank you that they are allowed to speak in the first place. Thank you. Making it feel like these women are the property of their husbands, the property of their fathers, they're so that then when he goes on to speak then about this experience, I'm thinking, okay, you've got me back. So Ruth, do you want to talk a little bit about how he began his actual talk?
So he wanted to share about being at home and being a young child and having to witness the birth of another child in the house. And that was just all a little bit odd. I think he wanted us to feel sorry for him and feel that was thanks, Elliot, and feel that was somehow, wasn't he brave?
He suddenly realised you're cooking the next meal, probably.
Yeah, he lives out of the country. He doesn't have to put up with me most of the time. But
for our podcast episode, Elliot Heath has said, my mum taught me when giving compliments to address things that people have deliberately chosen rather than natural qualities over which they had no control. He needs a chat with my mum. Thank you, Elliot. You are correct. We agree.
He's been well trained by his mum. So yeah, I think he gives this talk, and it was obviously quite a traumatizing experience for him in lots of ways.
Yeah.
It seemed to come across in that way to me. I was listening to it thinking, that's obviously really stayed with you, and it sounds like you were quite panicked and stressed at the time, but he wants to make light of it, but then go on to say, aren't women great for giving birth? And she had to stay in bed for 6 weeks. That woman was seriously, seriously ill. You don't stay in bed for 6 weeks after childbirth unless things have gone very badly wrong. And instead of, maybe that should tell us a little bit about the stress and the strain that is put on female bodies through the messages around just have another one, which was certainly the case when he was a child growing up in the church. So, we didn't go down that route. But that rang alarm bells for me, that this poor woman was 6 weeks in hospital, and then he was having to bring her beef soup and meat and things to try and build her up again. She sounds like she was very, very seriously poorly. And I just feel like, crikey, you've missed the point, mate. You really missed the point about what was going on there.
Yeah, because I'd like you to talk more about that situation, but this is why I actually felt like I had a bit of hope here that, you are going to speak to something super relevant, because having raised children who, for their brother with disabilities, are young carers. Now, they are a marginalised group. They're a vulnerable group in society. They are overlooked. They are young carers, have to do so much. Their education is impacted. Now, this has been President Baum has been a young carer who should not have to deal with these things, but he's in a position where he's having to offer care for his mum, and that is an incredible pressure. That is to be applauded. The young carers in our society are massively undervalued. They don't really get recognised for what they do. Oh my goodness, you've had this experience that actually could be incredibly helpful to people who care, especially because women tend to be undervalued caregivers. So you've got me. So then will you talk about where we go with this?
Yeah. And yet he doesn't.
He just didn't.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah. So that happens.
About lay aside things of the world. Don't worry about the worldly problems. Mum's now got Alzheimer's, but I take her a piece of beef to remind, because that's what I had to take when I was a child because she was so very poorly. Just completely skates past the whole message that he could have given, which would, like you say, been very dramatic, very powerful,
beautiful, and needed.
Lots of things to speak to there about families supporting each other, roles that we play, the things that we ask of each other physically, and the way that life can take a sharp change. And it just missed the point, but he did reference Nelson, so got that in there, didn't he? And there was lots of nodding towards Russell Nelson and quoting him in his talk as well, which again just felt tokenism.
He didn't take a long time to close. He only spoke for a fairly short time. Peter, perhaps I was looking for him to speak to the audience of women in a way that would have connected him. He had really moved towards vulnerability, and not just talking as a young carer, talking about his experience in caring for an elderly parent. Again, super relevant. Do you think it was too vulnerable?
I didn't understand that.
Neither did I, Alexa. Neither did I.
None of us did, Alexa.
Do you?
That's perfect. As he said, he didn't really follow it through because he went back to the script, just like Rebecca Craven did. He was back on script pretty quick. And I thought he was going to announce a social media fast for women, like where he started with the language, which is, we hear a lot now, which is the paranoia about leave the world, stay away from the world, switch all that off, only listen to the prophet, which Wendy's been pumping out and Nelson and others have as well. I genuinely thought, I was like, oh my gosh, you are kidding me. You're about to tell the women switch social media off so they don't get connected to the real world anymore and stop having a voice. So he certainly seemed to be steering in that direction, which I would say, because I'm always like criminologizing these things, is, well, again, one of their big worries and panics is what people are finding online, and that they are listening to the world. They're listening to the scientists, the historians, the teachers, the people who know what they're talking about, the people who've actually researched Mormon history. And it's all dangerous and it's breaking their testimonies. So he certainly seemed to be veering towards that, if there was a coherent message at that point anyway in his talk. Which again, I found really interesting, because they are aware of this threat they're under. They haven't the first clue how to actually respond to it coherently. I've got lots of suggestions if they want to listen to my very long podcasts. But as does everyone else in where we're talking about the Mormon Church in exile. You can tell them, I can tell them, you've already told them. Ruth, I just loved your sort of interview episode you did with 21st Century Saints here, and just learned so much from that, from your experiences and what you could feed back to these people about how not to screw up. But of course, they'd rather just switch it all off and go like, la, la.
So the quote that he gives from President Nelson is, examine your lives meticulously and regularly, and then he will prompt you what is no longer needed. But then he goes on to say, sisters need to learn how to say no, to which I wrote in my notes, okay, I'll say no. That's what I did. I got to the point where I went, I'm going to say no. What are you going to do about it? And it's really freeing. And I'm really sorry, Peter, that you've had to go through the pain of excommunication. But isn't it freeing to be in a position where you're no longer having to just jump when the fingers are snapped and the expectation changes on you, and you realize I can be my authentic self and I can choose what to believe, what not to believe, what to take, what to leave, and you suddenly start to live with a lot more integrity and a lot more authenticity, and that may draw you closer to faith. it may lead you away, but I don't think that actually when he said that, he really means that, because he doesn't mean you're allowed to say no to anybody at church. He means say no to somebody on a podcast,
the world.
Say no to the world, say no to anything that might distract you from doing the things that we want you to do as an organisation.
What we're going to do is just close out with some final thoughts. Before we close out, if you all would do us the huge honour of liking, of subscribing, if you find it relevant, if there's anyone who could benefit from it, maybe share this work. What we're going to do on Sunday night is to come back for Safeguarding Sunday. We have got something that we really, really need your help with. We hope you'll be able to join us for that. We should be broadcasting right after Nemo's show. It will be a short broadcast, but if you can join us, that would be incredible. But also next week, we're going to be joined by Mormon Civil Wars Peter Bleakley. You're going to come back and sit with us, along with Mormon Freedom Fairy Lynn Bleakley, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your journey. So we're going to definitely be continuing a lot of the themes that we picked up on tonight. So yes, please come back and join us for all the things that we have planned over the next week. So in closing out, we'll come to you first, Ruth. Any final thoughts about the conference or anything that you want to say as we're winding up?
I'm glad that I listened to it. It was painful, I've got to be honest, and it feels like I'm having to put on restrictive clothing again after sort of saying that this no longer works for me, this no longer works in my life and fits me and who I am. But I'm glad that I did it, and I was pleasantly surprised by a couple of the speakers. I still think when I sort of uncouple from there, they seem like good women. Does it offer value? Does it offer a way forward? I don't see it for what they're still supporting there is they're trying to keep the wheels on a very broken down train. So I don't, in some ways it was sad. In some ways it was refreshing to see new voices there. So yeah, I hope it meant something to the people that were there.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruth. Peter.
I think it represented the state of the church, the best of the best and the worst of the worst. We got the worst pharisaical, boring primary voice, patronizing patriarchal dreck you can imagine. But you've also got, despite all that, there is a better religion in there somewhere that makes women like Tracy DeMarco, that makes people confident, articulate, compassionate, caring, and giving it some way and able to communicate. But where it's so corrupted, it's kind of impossible not to be spoilt by the bad stuff. And it's going to take just such hard work and clarity and courage and being willing to defy the leadership to ever purge ourselves enough of the bad side. Of course, you can say this is what human beings are. We're a mess and we're not perfect and we're just trying. But there's a spectrum here. We can do better than this. We can do better than people coming from other countries to patronize us and actually bring us nothing useful and not listen or speak to what our needs are. And if they want to really run a global church rather than a Utah church with a mission field that the kids can visit every so often, they've got to take us far more seriously and actually treat us as if we matter and are worth preparing a talk for. But I think for me, ultimately, the big question here is, right, where can everyone go and listen to these talks for themselves? Global leaders of the LDS Church came to speak to the United Kingdom of Britain, Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And the nanosecond they stopped talking, it was erased from the internet. And they did this with the prophet, President Nelson and an apostle and their wives spoke to the whole of Europe a year or so ago, whenever it was. And the nanosecond they stopped talking, the people who really run this religion erased it all from the internet. It was gone in a poof. You had to watch it live or you missed it. And they don't even do that with General Conference. This begs so many questions. And the answers to those questions are, they clearly know these people talk utter bollocks. They know they talk nonsense. They know that it'd be awful if anyone held them accountable for the waffly nonsense they say and how useless it is. They don't trust their own leaders. When they say that they are speaking as the prophets to the whole world, or these are the mouthpieces of God to Britain, that should have been carefully recorded, and then, because the church is filthy rich, little DVDs made and posted to every woman and girl in Britain. It should be online. We should be putting out adverts in every newspaper and YouTube channel to advertise, come and listen to God's inspired male and female leaders to the world. They've got a special message for your country. This is what they said. Memorize it, discuss it, remember it. Oh, we've got the prophet of God has come to Europe. You know, we can read these prophets from 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. It's because people cared enough about what they said to write it down and keep passing it on. We will, of course, do that. President Nelson, who's the most amazing restoringist prophet since Joseph Smith, spoke to Europe. Here's a DVD of what he said. Here's a pamphlet. We'll buy a Netflix channel and you can watch it on telly on a 24-hour loop. This is what God's prophet says to Europe. Can you imagine that? How important it is that you all hear this? But what do they actually do? The second they can, they scrub it from the internet. We secretly recorded this, of course, and this would have been a 3-hour show if we'd actually shown clips. But I can't just put that out online somewhere because they'll come at us for copyright or something like that, probably. You know, we can sometimes use these clips. But that's just we've already talked about how within what they said, there's dysfunction, there's contradiction, and there's letdown and disappointment. But the huge mammoth elephant in the room is they don't believe their own stuff.
No,
they don't want any of
And
the
they
women
don't-
who were busy that night working as a nurse
No.
or staying up with a sick child to actually hear what these women leaders said. They took it off the internet because they have no respect for the fact that some people might be busy on a Sunday evening and need to watch it later, especially if they've got young children. They put this on at dinner and bath time. No respect for any of us, male or female. They tell us to adore these people as the mouthpieces of God, but they don't actually believe it because they don't want you to actually listen to it more than just listen to it live with everyone else, feel the spirit, kind of forget what they actually said, and it's gone. Warm fuzzies accomplished, nothing substantial. And they don't care that half the population simply weren't able to hear it that evening live because of other things going on.
Yeah.
It shows the empty.
They don't mean it. We know that they don't mean it when they're saying we want everyone to listen. It's by its very nature, it's excluding so many people that might find value in it and might find it uplifting. But it also shows that they're very scared by the longevity of the internet, of written materials nowadays. That worries them, that scares them, and rightly so, because they have a long history of having some very uncomfortable things in the past. However, you know, take your time, say what you want to say, and we can all live with a few people being human and speaking out of turn, saying the wrong words.
Yes.
The message is what's key, and we can deal with human frailty. What we can't abide is when you try to obfuscate what the true message is from your church. Don't tell us this is for the world and you're the prophet of the world, and then hide behind all of these layers of lawyers and double speak and hiding history and all of those things. It doesn't fly. It's got to be one way or the other.
I completely agree, and I'm really glad that you brought that up in your closing thoughts, Peter, because this is one of the things that I struggle with most, is the church's inability to let things just be. One of the reasons that we do this live is not just because I'm super lazy and can't be bothered editing that, but also because if we say something, then I'm going to stand by it. But also, I've said loads of things in this show that I actually would have filtered out, that I maybe have regrets about later on. And I've spoken to those regrets. Because we need to talk about them. That if we say something exactly in the same way that if we were in a Relief Society class, a priesthood class, bearing a testimony, that if we say it, we stand by it. And that's what I'd like to see from the church. My closing thoughts about Sunday is that I feel like it's almost worse when you get nearly there, when you see things being said that, oh, if we go down this road, we're going to, this is going to be the talk that I needed to hear. And then when it goes in completely the other direction, you're left with this feeling of emptiness, of, the feeling that Ruth described early on of empty calories, the feeling of seeking bread and being given a stone. It speaks more to the pain. I feel like every talk on Sunday, and some were great, and I appreciated the fact that, because we need to have more of these, we need to make them inclusive, broadcast them so that we can attend them and we can fully participate, especially whenever one of the voices that you're amplifying is a disabled young woman who often, we just can't get to conferences, when we can't make conferences because we are looking after our elderly parents or recovering from childbirth, or all of these things that women tend to find as barriers to being part of society. I felt like what happened was my team could have scored a goal and didn't. And it's because they haven't trained hard enough or they haven't practiced hard enough, but they're just so close to being there. I think I'm feeling more positive having had this conversation, because I'm able to remember where it almost went right. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling about it. One of the reasons that church becomes so painful is because we are not being fully fed, or we hear messages that are almost there but have just, it's caused more hurt than pain, or caused more hurt than healing. Sunday was okay. Sunday was okay, but we want substance. So I guess that's what I'm calling for. If you would like more substance, we are going to be speaking about some specifics of safeguarding. We've got a really exciting project we need to tell you about, and we need your help with it, especially if you're in the UK. So if you can tune in again on Sunday, we will be sharing the links for that just shortly. We're also going to have Peter and Lynn Bleakley with us next week. We are really excited about that too, and we've got some great guests who are going to be coming on over the next few weeks. So we've got lots planned for you, and we are so thankful that you have joined us thus far. My message, I guess, for the state president, for the area presidency and those who are working with them, is to thank them for the service. I know that the work that you guys are doing in the background for safeguarding is huge, and we want to bless the steps that you're taking, and we're excited to hear what you have in store for us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you back here on Sunday. Good night, everyone.
Good night.